So the net cost of blacks and Muslims in France was 4.97% of GDP, using very generous assumptions. France's average budget deficit from 2008 to 2017 was 4.52%. Now, France doesn't have statistics on race, and apparently they think this will hide the reality of African and Arab populations in France, but it won't. When looking at immigrants, those with African roots, which included Algeria, have about twice the unemployment rate of the French. Now, France is about 8.8% Muslim and 4.4% black. Obviously, these aren't exclusive categories, as there are plenty of black Muslims. Muslims make up between 60 and 70% of the prison populations, which means they will probably make up that, if not more, of the actual crime in France. The reason is that the French police almost certainly coddle non-Europeans living in France out of fear of racism charges, and there are 751 designated sensitive urban zones designated by the French government, or more colloquially called no-go zones. In addition, their unemployment rate is about twice that of the general French population. Now, maybe you don't care about literally losing territory to foreign populations who hate you. Maybe you're one of those people that are kind of like rats with toxoplasmosis that don't care about the impending death. Well, perhaps you care about your pocketbook. So let's talk about the financial cost of these people. Now, I believe black French are more Christian than Muslim, but forget it. Let's just say half of them are Muslim. And so if half of the black population is Muslim, that would make 11% of the French population African and or Muslim. Again, the French government hides this information, so we have to make inferences like this based on polling company data. So based on third-party analyses, French blacks have an income 65.78% of that of the French average, and Muslims are at 69.13% of the French average. Now remember, this is the overall French average, not the white French average. The overall French average includes the blacks and the Muslims. So let's just say 68%. The Afro-Muslim population in France earns 68% of the average income of the general population of France. How much in taxes will a population that pays 68% of the French average pay? The answer to this is very, very low, because in France, about 50% of the population pays zero taxes. And since the Afro-Muslim population is 32% below the average of the whole French population, we would, at an absolute maximum, based on a perfectly linear distribution of wealth, estimate that only 36% as many taxpayers per capita exist among the Afro-Muslim population as among the French average. And this is really a kind of theoretic maximum, because in reality, incomes and populations are normal, meaning they follow a bell curve shape. In reality, the Afro-Muslim population is almost certainly not going to have 36% as many taxpayers per capita as the overall of France. It's almost certainly going to be less than that. And of course, those taxpayers would be in a lower tax bracket on average if we assume anything like a normal distribution of incomes tailing out from a population median. Now, gee, it sure would be nice if the French government just published this data so the citizens who actually have to live in that country could know what's going on in what is supposedly their own fucking country. So they're going to have something like 18% as many taxpayers as the general French population per capita, but then those taxpayers are going to be in lower tax brackets than the general French population because of how normal distributions work. So of their taxpayers, that's going to be paying maybe half of what the average taxpayer pays for the general population. All told, the Afro-Muslim population is going to be paying about 10% as much in taxes per person as the general French population. But you know what? I'm doing some fuzzy math here. Let's give some cushion. Fuck it, let's double it. Let's say it's 20%. I think it's 10%, but let's say 20%. Let's say they pay 20% as much in taxes as the French average per person. So they're 11% of the population, and let's say they pay 20% as much in taxes as the general population per person, and so they pay 2.2% of total taxes in France. 2.2% of taxes in France, using these assumptions, come from Afro-Muslims. Okay. What do they get from the government? I have no fucking clue. it's going to be at least 11%. That's their population. But it's probably something like 20%, given how many of them are on the dole. But a problem I have is how much of the French government is Gibbs-me-dats. I don't know, because the French budget names for everything, they name everything retarded and euphemistically, and so you have no idea what anything really is. In the US, we clearly label what are Gibbs-me-dats. They're called entitlement programs or entitlement spending. But you know what? Because this is some fuzzy math, because France doesn't actually publish real data, and people are bound to not trust my numbers here anyway, because who knows, I'm like Nazi, racist, Ku Klux, white supremacist, wants to kill 6 million Jews, whatever. So you know what? Fuck it. Let's just assume they only use up 11% of the French budget. They're 11% of the population. Let's just assume they only use 11% of the French budget. Okay, so they are 11% of government spending, 2.2% of taxes, and so they are a net cost of 8.8% of France's government budget. All right, we're going with these numbers. These numbers are more than fair estimates. From 2008 to 2017, French government spending as a percentage of GDP was 56.51%. So Afro-Muslims are 8.8% of that net cost, or 4.97% net cost of GDP. Guess what? The budget deficit from France from 2008 to 2017 averaged 4.52% of GDP. And in all of this, remember, Afro-Muslims are part of the French average. So if you just had whites, the average numbers of all of these things would actually be higher. In addition, the white numbers themselves would probably be higher because you'd have a better capital to labor ratio, and wages per white person would be higher, and that would make the budgetary issues even better. But we don't even have to go down any of those butterfly effects. I have been extremely generous with my assumptions, and even so, the conclusion is inescapable. The budget deficit in France is a function of the blacks and the browns in France. On top of how these powerful, institutionally backed foreigners just make everything in France worse. They just make crossing the street a chore. They're also the reason France hasn't had balanced budgets for the past 10 years. So, was it worth it? Was your little soccer trophy worth it? You won the world championship in a children's game. Well, you didn't. A bunch of Muslims and Africans did. I guess the French government keeps the trophy or puts it in a case somewhere. Nah, I'm sure it's all worth it. The movies tell you that these kinds of things are important. And if I hear some French asshole saying this is fuzzy math, well, why doesn't your government publish the actual fucking data so I don't have to do this kabuki theater trying to figure out how much you paid for that trophy? You know they have this data. They just don't show you it because it will be used by racists to sow division, i.e. because you'll have a better understanding of the cost of their racial and religious supremacist program that they're foisting upon France, trying to make you a minority in your own country. A kind of warfare is what is being done to France, and that historically what has been done to France has been the wages of military defeat. In the past, the Ottomans had to fight and win wars in order to mass migrate people, and today your politicians just give it all away for nothing. And I go into this in a lot more detail in my video, Mass Immigration as a Form of Warfare. So when you're celebrating some black guys wearing red, white, and blue laundry with a little rooster emblazoned on it somewhere, winning a children's game and getting a trophy for it, think about how it's going to cost you everything and ask yourself, was it worth it?